You've been sitting there for 2 hours staring at something that should take 15 minutes, and the harder you try to focus, the more your brain feels like it's wrapped in fog. You tell yourself you'll start in 5 minutes, then another 5, then maybe after lunch, and by the end of the day you're drowning in guilt because once again you didn't do the thing you desperately needed to do. And the worst part? You know you're capable. You've done harder things before. You've pulled off miracles when the deadline was breathing down your neck or when someone else was counting on you. But when it's just you, for you, with no external pressure, it's like trying to push a car uphill with no wheels. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You've just been playing life on a difficulty setting most people don't even know exists. For years, you've watched other people glide through tasks that feel like climbing mountains for you. They sit down, they do the thing, they move on. Meanwhile, you're over here needing 3 different timers, a body double on a video call, the perfect background music, and a looming sense of catastrophe just to answer emails. You've tried every planner, every app, every motivational video, every promise to yourself that this time will be different. And maybe it works for a week, maybe even a month, until the system you built so carefully becomes just another thing you're avoiding, another reminder of how you can't seem to do what everyone else does naturally. The shame piles up quietly, year after year, until you start to believe that maybe you're just not trying hard enough, that maybe everyone else figured out some secret to being an adult and you somehow missed that day of school. If you've ever felt this way, if this sounds like the inside of your head, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now, because this whole channel exists for people who've been told their whole lives that they just need to try harder when the real problem was never about effort. Drop a like if you're tired of feeling like you're failing at being human when you're actually just wired differently. Here's what nobody tells you about living with a brain that works differently. It's not that you can't focus. It's that you can't control what you focus on. You can spend 6 hours completely absorbed in something that interests you, forgetting to eat, forgetting to move, forgetting time exists, and then you can't spend 6 minutes on something boring but important even when your entire future depends on it. People see the hyperfocus and think you're just being selective, that you're choosing not to care about the important stuff. But it's not a choice. It's like your brain has a radio dial that only picks up certain frequencies, and you can't manually tune it no matter how hard you try. The signal either comes in crystal clear or it's just static, and willpower has almost nothing to do with it. And then there's the exhaustion that nobody sees. You look fine on the outside. You're functioning, you're showing up, you're getting some things done. But inside you're running on fumes because everything takes more energy than it should. Having a conversation means managing what you say, how you say it, when to stop talking, whether you're talking too much, reading faces, remembering to make eye contact but not too much eye contact, and processing what the other person is actually saying all at the same time. Going to the grocery store means filtering out fluorescent lights, background music, crying children, cartwheels squeaking, decisions about which brand to buy, mental math about your budget, and not getting distracted by everything on the shelves. By the time you get home, your battery is at 3%, and someone asks you a simple question, and you just can't anymore. You need silence. You need dark. You need to stare at nothing for an hour just to reset. And when people don't understand why you're so tired from doing normal things, you start to feel weak, like you're failing at the basic task of existing. The worst part is the gap between what you know you can do and what you're actually doing. You know you're smart. You've proven it before. You can solve complex problems, have deep insights, create things that matter. But you can't remember to pay a bill on time. You miss appointments you really cared about. You forget conversations you had yesterday. You lose your keys 17 times a week. You have a drawer full of unopened mail because the thought of dealing with it creates this weird paralysis that makes no logical sense. So you start to believe 2 contradictory things at once: that you're capable of great things and that you're completely incompetent at life. And that split creates this constant background noise of shame that colors everything you do. Let's talk about time for a second, because time probably doesn't work for you the way it works for other people. There's now and there's not now. That's basically it. Something either has to be done immediately or it exists in this vague future space that might as well be next year, even if it's tomorrow. You've probably missed things you really cared about, not because you didn't care, but because they lived in the not now category until suddenly they were in the past. People think you're irresponsible or that you don't value them, but the truth is your brain just doesn't naturally track time the way theirs does. You need external structure, alarms, reminders, systems, but even those only work until they don't, until your brain learns to tune them out like background noise. And motivation. Let's talk about how motivation works completely differently for you. Other people seem to have this steady baseline of motivation that carries them through boring necessary tasks. You don't have that. You have either intense interest that pulls you forward like a magnet, or you have nothing. The dishes don't get done until they're a health hazard. The project doesn't start until panic sets in. The thing you've been meaning to do for weeks suddenly becomes possible at 2 in the morning when you should be sleeping. People call this procrastination, but that word makes it sound like you're relaxing, like you're choosing to put things off. You're not relaxing. You're anxious the whole time. You're thinking about the thing constantly. You just can't make yourself do it until some invisible switch flips in your brain, and suddenly you can. You've probably built your whole life around compensating for this. You overpromise because you genuinely believe you'll follow through this time. You create elaborate systems to trick yourself into functioning. You use shame and guilt as fuel, running on stress hormones because that's the only way to generate enough activation energy to get started. You've become an expert at last-minute miracles, at pulling things together when failure is no longer theoretical but imminent. And it works, kind of, until it doesn't. Until you burn out so completely that even the panic doesn't work anymore. Until the systems that held you together stop holding and you can't figure out why. The thing is, your brain isn't broken. It's different. And different doesn't mean less. It means it runs on different fuel. Most brains get a steady supply of dopamine from completing tasks, from making progress, from doing what they're supposed to do. Your brain doesn't. Your dopamine system works differently. It needs novelty, urgency, interest, challenge, or sometimes just chaos to produce the neurochemical you need to function. Without that, it's like trying to start a car with no gas. You can turn the key all you want. You can sit there willing it to start. But nothing happens until you give it what it actually needs. This is why you can suddenly focus perfectly when the deadline is in 6 hours. Why you can work all night on a project that fascinates you. Why crisis mode makes you weirdly functional. Why you perform better under pressure. It's not that you're lazy the rest of the time. It's that your brain finally has the fuel it needs to work. The problem is you can't live your whole life in crisis mode. That's not sustainable. Eventually, your body pays the price. Eventually, the anxiety becomes constant. Eventually, you can't tell the difference between actual emergencies and normal life because you've trained your nervous system to treat everything like a threat just to get enough activation energy to function. You've probably spent years thinking something was fundamentally wrong with you as a person, that you lacked character, discipline, maturity, whatever. But character isn't the issue. Your values aren't the issue. You care deeply about things. You want to show up for people. You want to do well. The issue is that the bridge between intention and action works differently in your brain, and nobody ever taught you that. Nobody told you that executive function is an actual thing, a set of mental processes that some brains do automatically and some brains have to work really hard to access. Nobody explained that working memory is limited, that some people can hold 7 things in their head at once, and you might only be able to hold 2. Nobody mentioned that emotional regulation takes extra effort when your brain processes emotions more intensely. You just thought you were failing at being a person. And the saddest part is how many years you've spent believing you're not living up to your potential, that you're wasting your abilities, that you could be doing so much more if you just tried harder. But you've been trying. You've been trying so hard that it's exhausting. You've just been trying to use strategies designed for a different kind of brain. It's like you've been following a recipe for bread, but your oven is set to different temperatures, and then feeling like a failure when the bread doesn't rise. The recipe wasn't wrong. Your oven just needed different instructions. Here's what changes when you understand this. You stop fighting against yourself. You stop trying to force yourself into shapes that don't fit. You start working with your brain instead of against it. You find ways to add the novelty, urgency, or interest that your dopamine system needs. You break tasks into smaller pieces because your working memory needs support. You use external systems because your internal time tracking is unreliable. You build and rest because you're using more energy than people realize. You stop judging yourself for needing things other people don't need. And slowly, the shame starts to lift. You start to see that all those years, you weren't failing. You were working twice as hard to get half as far and somehow still showing up. You were carrying weight nobody else could see and still moving forward. You were playing on hard mode while everyone else had the difficulty set to normal, and nobody told you that's what was happening. They just kept saying you needed to try harder, to be more disciplined, to grow up, to get it together. But you were already giving everything you had. You were already doing your best. It just didn't look like other people's best because the game was different. The truth is you've been strong this whole time. Stronger than you realized. Because it takes an incredible amount of strength to keep going when everything feels harder than it should, when you're constantly fighting your own brain just to do basic things, when the world keeps telling you you're not enough. And you kept going anyway. You found ways to survive. You built workarounds. You made it this far. That's not failure. That's resilience. That's you figuring out how to exist in a world that wasn't designed for the way you're wired. So maybe it's time to stop measuring yourself against a standard that was never meant for you. Maybe it's time to recognize that your brain needs different things, and that's okay. Maybe it's time to let go of the story that you're somehow fundamentally flawed and start telling yourself the truth, which is that you've been doing something really difficult, and you've been doing it alone, and you're still here. You didn't fail at life. You just didn't know you were playing on hard mode. And now that you know, now that you understand what's actually happening, you can stop fighting yourself and start building a life that actually works for the brain you have. Not the brain you think you should have, the one you actually have. Because that brain, with all its quirks and challenges, is also capable of remarkable things. It just needs the right conditions to shine. And you deserve to give yourself those conditions. You always did.